Hey, good morning, folks. Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills daily devotional. And today's topic is titled Conforming versus Submitting. Now, aren't those two the same thing, Pastor Stephen? Well, hold on, because we're going to be talking about that today. And it comes via First Peter. That's the book that I've been tracking through lately. And it's chapter 2. And I want you to listen to what Peter is going to say here in verses 13 through 15 in his letter to first century believers, right? Okay, he says this, all right? He says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men." Now, what in the world is Peter doing here? Because wasn't he just telling us in like the previous passages, wasn't he saying stuff like, hey, fight the flow, live as strangers, don't conform? And then all of a sudden here in chapter 2, verse 13, all of a sudden he goes, submit, right? Is Peter contradicting himself? Well, I would argue that he isn't, all right? And so there's something, I try to tease this out every once in a while. It's this idea that the truth is in the tension, that conforming and submitting, although on the surface, seem like they're the same thing, okay? They seem like they're the same thing, but here Peter's telling us that they're different. And when I say something like the truth is in the tension, what that means is that there's a deeper truth present here, all right? And that's what I'm going to try to unpack here, because the deeper truth, believe it or not, has to do with something called motive. Motive. What is the intention of the heart? What is going on beneath the surface? And that's what we're going to try to dig out here, right? And so what's the difference, Pastor Stephen, then, between conforming and submitting? Well, I am glad you asked, all right? Okay, so first thing, one of those, okay, is based in fear. The other is based in love. Okay? Conforming. When I conform to something, oftentimes I'm doing it out of fear. And think back about what Peter's been telling these first century believers when he's telling them to fight the flow and to live as strangers and to not conform to the way of the world, right? He's hitting at the reason why they're doing it is oftentimes out of fear of abuse, out of fear of persecution, out of fear of death, beatings, imprisonment, right? There's real fear on the scene for these first century believers. And Peter is challenging that fear when he's telling them, don't conform, but rather, now in chapter 2, verse 13, he's telling them to submit. And submission is something that is based in love, right? That's what he's trying to hit at is conforming. You're doing that out of fear. But when you submit to someone, you're doing it out of a sincere love for them, which is kind of a callback to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, which I've already talked about. All right. Okay. So difference number one, one's based in fear. The other's based in love. Okay. Difference number two, one is based in your identity. The other is based in insecurity, right? When I conform, I'm doing it out of my insecurity. I'm trying to blend in. I'm trying to fit in because I don't want to stand out, because I don't want people judging me for who I think they might think I am, right? And so when I'm conforming, I'm doing it oftentimes out of my insecurity. Rather, when I submit, I can submit based on my identity, right? Now think about Peter's track record here for just a moment, okay? Peter's the guy on the night when Jesus was arrested in the garden who pulls out his sword and says, "No way, Jose," and cuts off one of the soldiers' ears, right? That's that's Peter. Remember Peter, right? He's the dude who often acted before he thought, right? And so he's going to cut off this guy's ear, right? But now Peter has learned a new way to fight, okay? He's learned a new way to fight the flow, isn't pulling out swords and cutting off ears. He's learned a new way to fight, has to do with love, right? And he watched how Jesus responded on the night he was betrayed. He watched how Jesus responded when he was arrested. And now Peter, who, think about it, at this point, okay, if you've ever read Acts chapter 12, and maybe I'll turn there. I should turn there. Is Peter has this death warrant out for him, okay, issued to him by King Herod, right? And isn't he just telling us to submit to every authority, whether it's to the king or the governor? Because that sounds interesting to me, because Peter has a death warrant. This is Acts chapter 12, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 4. It says, "It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also." Okay? And this happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. And Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover, right? And so Peter is this guy who's got this interesting track record where when Jesus is arrested, sword out, ear cut off, right? And now he's telling us to submit to those authorities, even to a dude who has it out for him, who's issued a death warrant for him, right? And it's because Peter isn't operating out of his insecurity anymore. He's operating out of his identity, who he is and who he's been called to be because of Jesus, right? And okay, difference number 3, one compromises who you are, the other exalts who Jesus is, right? When I conform, oftentimes I'm going to have to compromise. I'm going to have to compromise my integrity. Rather, when I submit, it's going to exalt who Jesus is. And remember what we talked about in a previous episode about how the goal of standing out isn't to draw attention to me. It's to bring glory to God by drawing attention to Jesus, right? And so how do I do this Jesus life well? Okay, well, it's learning that I shouldn't be conforming to the way of the world, but on the flip side, it's learning how to submit to people even when I disagree with them, even when they have it out for me, even when it means my life is in danger, even when it means my life is on the line. I've got to learn to submit in spite of the pressures of society. And that was a hard lesson for Peter to learn. And it's a hard lesson for you and I to learn. But it's the way that Jesus has called us to live. Hey, you guys, I hope you have an awesome day. Be blessed.